On today's episode of Notable New England, we're talking about a new local news source created by community members after their beloved newspaper shut down. It's a great example of people coming together with a shared purpose to keep their neighbors informed about what's happening locally. I think you'll find it both informative and inspiring, especially if you've ever wondered what can be done when a local paper disappears. Stay tuned. Hello, lovely listeners, and thank you for tuning into this edition of Notable New England. For those of you who are new here, my name is Gretchen B. I am a lifelong, proud New Englander, and my mission with this podcast is to strengthen communities and tell the stories about the people, places, and things that make New England so noteworthy. Before I begin the show, I want to announce that I received 2 photos for the Notable New England Spring Photo Contest, and I've made a decision that I am going to give both of these submissions a New England prize pack. So congratulations to Jimmy as well as to Ginger. I'm going to post their spring photos on our Notable New England social media accounts and our Patreon page. And Jimmy and Ginger will be getting Notable New England prize packs chock full of some wonderful New England goodies. I want to thank Jimmy and Ginger for entering the contest and for winning. On today's episode, I'm speaking with Carrie Bunker and Nita Hansen from the Neshobe Current in Vermont. You might remember I mentioned the Neshobe Current in a recent Wicked Light Bites segment. After the Brandon Reporter shut down, Carrie, Nita, and a small group of community members came together to create a local news source for their community, one built by the community for the community to keep people informed about what's happening in their area. I was really struck by how innovative and inspiring this response was in the wake of losing a local paper, and I think you will be too. My hope is that this conversation will not only give you a behind-the-scenes look at what they've built, but hopefully it also sparks ideas for what might be possible in your own community if your local news source ever disappears. Before we get to my conversation with Carrie and Nita, let's dig into some Wicked Light Bites, community-oriented stories and happenings from each New England state. A Cambridge, Massachusetts institution will be closing after 107 years in business. The renowned S&S Deli in Inman Square will be shutting its doors for good in June. Since 1919, the S&S has been serving neighbors, students, and commuters Reubens, knishes, matzo ball soup, and other Jewish comfort food. The S&S takes its name from the owner's great-grandmother, Rebecca Ma Edelstein, who would welcome her customers in Yiddish, S&S, which is a maternal expression for eat and eat. Owner Gary Mitchell started working at the counter at the S&S when he was 12 years old. He says it is now time for a new chapter. In a recent Boston Globe article, Gary said, quote, "I'm proud of the chapters behind us and looking forward to what's next," end quote. Information for this item comes from the S&S Deli website as well as Mitch Rosenthal at Hoodline Boston. St. Johnsbury, Vermont will be getting a new food co-op thanks to the help of community members and students in the Career and Technical Education program at St. Johnsbury Academy. The students will be doing a large portion of the plumbing and electrical work while being supervised by their teachers who are experts in these fields. The Caledonia Food Co-op was imagined by the community after the Wall Walgreens in the middle of town shuttered in October of last year. The community raised enough money to support and build the co-op, and they're due to open on June 24th. Information for this item comes from Erica Heilman at Vermont Public. Seacoast Lit Fest will take place June 11th through the 14th at the Music Hall in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Readers will be able to connect through book chats, author talks, panels, book signings, a book fair, and more. Best-selling author, humanitarian, and host of Today with Jenna and Friends, Jenna Bush Hager, will be appearing on June 11th at 7 p.m. as part of Writers on a New England Stage, also featuring Shannon Garvey, whose debut novel June Baby will be published by Jenna Bush Hager's Thousand Voices imprint with Random House Publishing Group. Other notable authors who will appear at the festival will be Dr. Temple Grandin, Jill Lepore, and Barbara McQuaid. For a full festival lineup, see the show notes for more information. Thank you to the staff of New Hampshire Public Radio for the information for this item. The Maine Turnpike Authority has launched an effort to support the declining monarch butterfly population in Maine. The MTA has planted milkweed seeds in a meadow area at their Crosby Farm maintenance camp in South Portland. Milkweed is the only plant where they lay their eggs and is the primary food source for monarch caterpillars. Sean Donahue, the permitting coordinator and environmental liaison at MTA, says, quote, "We planted a mix of milkweed and wildflower seeds in 4 newly tilled strips of meadow and added a light mulch to help them take root. We've set aside a 75 by 200 foot area that won't be mowed until after October 1st each year, so the plants have plenty of time to grow and support pollinators. We're excited to see how the habitat develops and are hopeful for strong germination this season," end quote. The MTA is also exploring the possibility of participating in a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service approved monarch and pollinator habitat conservation program. They also have started working with nearby universities to identify opportunities for student-driven research in ecological monitoring, plant systematics, and conservation. Information for this item comes from a press release by the Maine Turnpike Authority. 4-time WNBA champion, 5-time Olympic gold medalist, and now she'll likely have a new title: Connecticut's state bird. The Connecticut legislature approved a bill now headed to Governor Ned Lamont's desk, where Sue Bird will share the title of state bird every March with the longtime title holder, the American robin. House Speaker Matt Ritter said, quote, "When this bill is adopted, if the governor signs it the month of March, we will have 2 state birds," end quote. Sue Bird's Instagram account for her podcast Bird's Eye View showed a post from her days playing at UConn, which was captioned, "What an honor." Sue Bird led the University of Connecticut to 2 national titles as the Huskies' star point guard, including an undefeated season in her final year in 2002. She was inducted into the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame last year. Information for this item comes from Dave Collins of the Associated Press for NBC Connecticut. Senate lawmakers in Rhode Island have approved legislation that would allow bars and restaurants in the Ocean State to stay open later throughout the 2026 FIFA World Cup. Local licensing authorities would be allowed, but would not be required, to grant temporary periods for extended indoor service hours under existing liquor licenses for World Cup matches between June 11th and July 3rd. Eligible bars and restaurants would be allowed to stay open until 4 a.m. and be allowed to serve liquor until 3 a.m. Eligible bars and restaurants who are interested must submit their applications 2 weeks in advance. Senator Matthew LaMountain said, quote, "The World Cup is a huge economic opportunity for Rhode Island. As these matches are taking place at various times, this bill will give bars and restaurants the option of remaining open to provide a safe place for fans to watch and enjoy those games, as long as local licensing authorities agree." End quote. The legislation now heads to the House, which has already passed similar legislation introduced by Representative Joshua Giraldo. Information for this item comes from Sarah Bodden at WPRI 12. Up after the break, I'll be talking with Carrie Bunker and Nita Hansen of the Neshobe Current, a new Vermont news outlet stepping in to fill the gap left by the Brandon Reporter with a unique community-driven model. Stick around. You're listening to Notable New England. If you've been enjoying Notable New England, I'd love your support in helping this little show grow. This is a one-person podcast. No big production team, no marketing department, no team of writers, just me putting in the time and covering the costs to share the stories, places, and people that make New England so special. So if you like what you hear, here are a few simple ways that you can help. You can follow along on social media. Our show notes have links to all of our social media accounts. Tell a friend about the show or leave a review on your favorite podcast app. It all makes a real difference. And if you'd like to support financially, you can make a one-time gift at buymeacoffee.com/Notable New England, and I'll give you a shout out on the air. That's buymeacoffee.com/Notable New England, or you can become a monthly supporter for as low as $2 per month on Patreon, where you can get some great perks like early ad-free listening and more. Go to patreon.com/Notable New England for more information. That's patreon.com/Notable New England. However you choose to support, just being here and listening means so much to me. Thank you for being part of this wonderful community. With increases in costs for printing, paper, postage, and dwindling ad revenue, many U.S. newspapers have gone away. According to a Northwestern University report, 40% of all U.S. newspapers have gone dark since 2005. Joining me today on the podcast is Carrie Bunker and Nita Hansen of the Neshobe Current. When the Brandon Reporter, which served Brandon and Pittsford and surrounding communities in Vermont, shut down, a group of volunteer residents stepped in to help keep their local communities informed and to fill the void left by the Brandon Reporter. I found this approach quite fascinating, and I wanted to find out more. This is such a great example of communities stepping up, and I hope that perhaps it serves as inspiration to other communities who have lost their local newspapers. Welcome to the podcast, Carrie and Nita. I'm really excited to talk to you both today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
So what made you decide we're not going to let local news disappear in our community when the Brandon Reporter had shuttered?
I think it sort of was a bit of a wake-up call in terms of how things were locally, because we don't really have anybody that focuses just on Brandon. And we're not a huge town by any means. I think sort of between our little what do you want to call it, like hamlets or, things like that. There's like maybe 4,500 people kind of in our area, which, seems like, we probably wouldn't have that much news, but there's a surprising amount of things that happen each week to, where we get to the point where it's like, there's probably nothing going on this week. I don't know what we're going to post. And all of a sudden we get flooded Tuesdays and Wednesdays in our inbox. I think just knowing that I didn't want to lose a source. And granted, I didn't read the paper every week, but I read it most weeks. And I didn't want to lose that connection that I had to knowing what was going on at town hall, or what the select board was doing, or what the next big paving project was, or things like that. So I think once I saw sort of that notification, I was just like, well, this can't happen. Like we can't lose this, whatever, however it moves forward, we still need a local news source for us.
So, I just wanted to add, I think, especially at a time when things are so polarized at the national level, that it's really important to have things to share kind of on a smaller scale that bring us all together and kind of help counteract that effect.
Now, my understanding is that none of the staff are professional journalists. So I'm curious how you figured out who was going to be doing what, especially without a traditional newsroom structure.
I think we kind of lucked out in a way. So we all have very sort of different backgrounds. So where I come from, a creatives and writing and tech background, one of our other main people has a big, heavy tech background and some very big websites. Nita's fantastic at writing, even, and handles our emails and does a lot of our editing. And we lucked out that we have a couple people who really can edit. One works for a book company currently, and so she's in the editing field currently. So between sort of all of our skills, we were kind of able to be like, oh, it sort of, I think the flow kind of just happened. Like we were like, oh, this is just working out, And so I think we got very lucky in that respect. But yeah, it's been a good group of people who kind of all very much had the same vision, like Nita said, of trying to keep the community informed and sort of bring them together in a different kind of way. So, it's been fun.
It just kind of came together.
It sounds like with the community atmosphere of the Neshobe Current, you're going to have people with all sorts of different areas of expertise. And I had read in the article from Vermont Public about you that, you had wanted to get community members involved in doing things like movie reviews and entertainment and, town sports and things of that nature. How else are you trying to get the community involved in the production of the Neshobe Current?
We were lucky in that the Brandon Reporter had some really nice established columns, and some of those folks were happy to have an outlet again. There was maybe a 4 or 5 month period between when the Reporter closed and when we got up and running. And so some people were definitely kind of like, where, well, I want to have some place to publish what I want to share. And they were kind of, I think, happy to see us come into existence. We've been so busy so far, I think, pulling together kind of how we're making this work, that we haven't yet done a lot of outreach. We sent out a public notice through our Front Porch Forum network, kind of email network that each town has, and got some general interest. And, so just kind of, I think for us, it was really important to figure out when we came together what we could do sustainably and what we could each bring to it, and create something from there, as opposed to feeling like we had to fill the shoes of the Brandon Reporter, which was done beautifully prior to us. So it was, I think, more a matter of, okay, let's create this kind of hub for communication and see what comes our way and see what we can do.
What has surprised you most about running the Neshobe Current so far?
Probably for me, it was the growth. We picked up far more subscribers than I anticipated for what our third month. I think we're in month 3. And just, the support of like our downtown business association and just people out in the community who I hear recognize me because I also work part-time at our library. So they're like, are you doing the paper? I'm like, yes, that's me. So I think, we knew that the town was missing the paper, but it also kind of surprised me how much the town was missing the paper. And so it's been nice to see, I think, that people send us emails and they're like, oh, I'm so glad you're doing this. We're really grateful to have the paper back in some form. And I think we're pretty different than what the newspaper was. It's like we're not trying to be we're somewhere between like a newspaper and a magazine and a blog almost. It's sort of this little hybrid of information. So,
and what kinds of stories have resonated most with your readers so far?
Well, we laugh about this, but one of our top draws is our police log for whatever reason. And I think it's our human interest stories tend to get a lot of notice. So anything that sort of has almost an emotional appeal to it, I think seems to be sort of a better draw. Whether sometimes it's stuff that makes people a little angry, but also it's stuff that drew them in. So like we just had an article about somebody installing a wind phone. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's this very cool, like, it started in Japan back, I think it was 2011, and this guy was just sort of missing conversations he'd had with his cousin. And so he installed a phone box in his garden. And of course, it's not connected to anything, so he could just go out there and talk. And so it sort of spread from there. And I think now this one is like the 13th in the state. And so I got a lot of interest on social media and draw and articles about our police department because they're all new. So Nita did a great piece or 3 pieces it ended up being, talking to them and getting to know who they are and where they came from. And so things like that seem to be our sort of biggest draws, I think.
It does seem like people are interested in learning about the people behind the jobs in the town, I would say. There was also a piece on the animal control officer that one of our colleagues did that was, I think, of a lot of interest, partly because there was an animal abuse situation in town recently. So there's been a lot of concern about that, I think. But just the chance to kind of get to know some of the aspects of how the town works from a different angle, I think, has been of interest to people too.
I mean, people do know what we're doing. So like the animal abuse story came to us. Like, I don't even think we sought that out. And I didn't know about it until they came to us with the story. We sort of hear random people, like I said, I work at the library, so they'll come up to me and they're like, "Oh, are you doing the paper? Oh, I really liked this." Or like we get people writing in saying, "Oh, could you cover this?" Or "Have you thought about this?" And a lot of the stuff is things that we have on our list of, we hope to get to them someday, like covering school events and games and things like that. But our group is so small that we don't quite have that steady input yet of other contributors. So that's kind of what I've seen in the community, of just little bits here and there of like, "Oh, I really like this," or "Keep up the good work," kind of thing, which is neat. I'm very typically shy person, so we've actually lived here about 25 years, and I've met more people probably in the past 6 months than I have like in the 20 years. Like, I didn't know Nita before this. I didn't know anybody else that we were working with. I had never met any of them before. So in that respect, it's been good for me too, I guess, to kind of get out of my shell a little bit and just meet more people and kind of get to know more community members just by doing this thing that we hoped would take off. But you just never know, because a lot of people really still want the paper and they like the tactile feel of it. And so it's sometimes, for some folks, it can be a hard sell to just be online. But so far, there's been people who really don't like to be online, but they are reading us anyway. So I feel like that's a win.
Yeah, one of the other areas that, I mean, I don't know that the articles are read quite as much, but I think they're wonderful pieces, I should say. We have a few people who write about kind of aspects of the history of town that really bring a lot, I think, especially for newer people coming to town, to kind of have a chance to learn some of the history that they wouldn't otherwise know, has been really meaningful. And also memorials, I think, have been a big thing. I remember when we first started, one of the first things we did was a memorial for a man named Dick Kirby, he was just a fixture in town. And unfortunately, we lost him right around when the paper was, or the Current was starting. And but I think we all had some doubt when we started this project of, are we going to be able to do something that's worthwhile, that's of use to people? And as soon as the piece came out, somebody in town wrote a really nice memorial for him that we printed or published as maybe our second piece. And as soon as I saw that published, I thought what we're doing is worthwhile, just to kind of have it to be a place where people can share those connections that are so meaningful in a small community.
So we are seeing a lot of local newspapers disappear across the country. And what do you think is being lost when that happens?
I think it's connection. It's very, primarily most of the work I do is online. And so not having a touch point to go to say like, oh, here's the select board meeting notes and here's an article about ticks in the garden. I don't think you knew what you lost until it kind of went away. Like all of a sudden it was like, oh dear, like this is not good. So I think that trying to build back that community touch point is really important.
That's such a great point that you bring up. The local papers really do create a sense of community connection. And the beautiful thing about local papers is that they cover stories that the national news or even the larger city papers are not going to cover in the smaller communities. And without that kind of coverage, you really do lose this layer of connection. And I do think about this often when big national events happen. For instance, when everything was going on in Minneapolis, you have the national news reporting, but really, I was looking to the local papers because I wanted to see what's really going down in the community from people who live there, people who are experiencing the day to day that, those bigger papers are not necessarily going to cover. And, again, they're the boots on the ground reporting on really what's going on at that local level. So it is a huge loss, like you say, that people don't always realize until it's gone. And I feel like we're just so much more isolated as a society now as far as people to people connection with, social media, people burying their heads in their phones. It used to be that you'd get your news from the local paper, but you'd also like be down at the coffee shop talking with the neighbors and, what's going on and the local gossip and that sort of thing. And that kind of everyday connection, I feel like doesn't happen as much anymore, which is why something like the Neshobe Current is such an asset because it does help people stay informed and connected to their community.
For me, I think I am really aware of how when you don't have a local source of news, just it's hard to have a common understanding of what's happening in town and an awareness of kind of opportunities that are out there. But I think just a lot of people can't or don't want to take the time to go to a select board meeting, and yet they're going to be voting on things that are, that come up. And I think it's really important for people that have a way to get information in a way that's reasonably easily available to them about what's happening in the town that they live in. And I think that's one thing that we can offer.
What would you say to a community that has just lost its paper and they don't know what to do next? Do you think that the Neshobe Current could be a model for other communities?
I think we were fortunate that we had the heads up that the newspaper was closing, and their hope was that somebody would either take it on or make it just online or whatever the case, whatever they were hoping for. So it definitely takes a lot of, I don't want to say it takes a lot of people because there's really only like 3 of us that kind of really are sort of in it every day. And then we have another 3 who are in it as they can have the time. And so, I mean, it's definitely, I think, a model that other people could do. And if somebody wanted to reach out to us, I'd be happy to go over what tech we use and how we set things up. But I think the key is finding people who are tech savvy, at least one person who's been nice, whereas we can fulfill the void that, like, if I don't know something, chances are the other person does. And then we teach Nita because she likes to learn. And it's always good to have more than one person who can do a tech thing. We try to keep with a platform that is self-updating. We don't have to worry about plugins or anything like that. It is a more expensive platform, and as you want more features, of course, the more that costs. But I think it's definitely doable for other people. You just almost have to look into the right group. So casting your net really wide and seeing, because I think that first meeting where the original Brandon Reporter people came and they're like, this is what's happening. We're shutting down October 1st. And I think 60 people went to that meeting. And from there, I think maybe we had 7 that kind of showed up for a smaller meeting. And then 5 or 6 of us stuck. And then a couple have come back. We've gotten new people to come in. So you really have to cast that wide net and see who's in your town, see who can do the text, see who can do the editing, who can write. I'm not great at journalistic articles, but I think I can do a human interest piece pretty well. So everybody has a different strengths, and it's hoping that you find those people who are invested enough to be like, okay, I know I'm not going to make any money doing this, but it's important that there's a place where people can go to get information in a way that's digestible and hopefully fun in some places. And so I do think it's repeatable, absolutely. It's just getting the right folks in your community.
I think one of the things I would say is we spent probably 4 months meeting, I don't know, once a month or something. Once we determined that this small group was going to do something, and we spent a lot of time and energy, I think, or not time, but a lot of our focus, I think, was on, okay, what can we bring to this and what can we create? So I would encourage a small group in another town to think about really what fits them, because it's got to be an effort like this that's all volunteer. It's got to be something that works for them. Our tech people have been great about finding things that make it easy to just plug in and get things published in a nice way. Maybe for a different group of people, that would be a different thing. I think part of why it's been so successful for us is that we all have just been able to give naturally what we want and what we bring to it. And it's worked well together as opposed to trying to force it. I remember when I go to meetings early on, I'd be stressed sometimes going into the meeting because this felt like such a big thing. And how are we ever going to make this happen? And then coming out of the meeting, I would always feel like, okay, we can do this. Whereas so often it's the other way around. It's not always so easy to try to work together as a small group to do something. But I feel like we all brought a certain amount of openness that helped us work together in a really good way and helps make it fun, that I think will help make it also sustainable.
Right now, the Neshobe Current is volunteer run, and I know that you have a goal of becoming a nonprofit eventually. I would love to know what sustainability looks like long term for the Neshobe Current, and where do you see the Neshobe Current a year from now, for example?
I think just continued growth and connection. Definitely we do need to get our nonprofit status. That's kind of, I think, the next big thing we need to work on. And there's, sort of multiple paths to that, but, sort of right now, one of our barriers is financial and not quite knowing, like, can we take donations at this stage and not have to worry about, whose taxes are going to take the hit at the end of the year kind of thing. So, for me, I would just like to get to a point where if we, the expenses that we do have, will I think eventually grow because, we can only stay at the tier that we're at on our website until we hit 1,000 subscribers, and then our cost goes up a little bit. So, there's some things like that. So, I would just like to see us grow to a point where it's just sustaining itself and it just kind of continues to grow, and, hopefully more people come to us with things that they'd like to publish, and just have a way to keep the community informed and connected.
Yeah. My hope would be that we can, continue to expand, and maybe venture more into, if we get the right people, venture into a little bit more, not hard news, but, go beyond the human interest stories as is needed or would be helpful in our community. And we had a new volunteer come to us who just moved to town recently, who has experience on the national level as a journalist. And so that's kind of a nice addition that may help us move in that direction. Because I think one of the things that not surprised me, but really struck me in this process was how much there is to think about in terms of how things are reported on and, some of the ethics and legalities that are just really hard for, some random person to kind of have a sense of. But I hope we'll continue learning on that front and also just that we'll continue checking in with ourselves about how things are going and what, are there tweaks that we want to make? So far, we've done a lot of that tweaking to make things work better. And I think as long as we keep a certain level of kind of self-awareness of how things are working for us, that will serve us well in terms of sustainability. But yeah, definitely kind of I think we probably all would like to see a little broader reach in terms of what we're doing as time goes on.
How can community members get involved with the Neshobe Current if they feel inclined to volunteer? I know you would love to have more people involved to cover community events or meetings or things of that nature.
So we have a couple spots on our website where you can submit a form, and with them, Nita reaches out to anyone who submits that to see what they're interested in. They can always just shoot us an email too if they didn't want to bother with the form. And I think it's in terms of what we're looking for is probably people to help cover town meetings, select boards, like these community hub meetings, school board, anything like that where and if they only wanted to do that one thing once a month, that would be fine. I think tech-wise, I think we're okay right now. Luckily, the website is I don't have to worry about updating it. It updates itself. So it's more like just learning how it works versus building it.
We're stronger on people writing in about their own interests. Like we have a gardening column and someone who's writing a great series about geological history of our area. So we have some people who are sharing specific interests. What's a little harder is to get people to cover things that we think are important to cover that aren't necessarily of anyone's special interest, but are important to the community. So probably that would be my biggest hope, is that we can find some people who maybe actually on some level like going to meetings and translating them to that average reader.
We don't even need somebody necessarily to write the article for us, but if they came to us with really great notes, that's super helpful too, because we can put them together on our end. That's not a problem. But it's being able to get to the meetings and do all this other stuff is sometimes a challenge when there's just a few of us with the time. So
yeah, I've really enjoyed going to even school board meetings I hadn't really been to before. I have a son, but he's not in the school, so I didn't really have any reason to interact. But just, yeah, like once I went, I didn't necessarily think I wanted to go, but once I went and was covering it, I tuned in a different way. And it was like, oh, this is really interesting, all the different things that they're having to weigh. And yeah, I hope for not only for the sake of the readers that people get involved, but for their own kind of involvement and sense of being a part of the workings of the town.
Do you have any words of advice to a community that's looking to replicate a similar model to the Neshobe Current? Like, what are some helpful reminders when navigating challenging times, or if you're trying to get a similar publication off the ground? What are some things that keep you motivated when times are challenging?
There's always a way, whether it might not seem like it initially, but there are a lot of people out there who are willing to help. If somebody's in our situation where they lost their paper and they want and need information about how we did this, I would be happy to share it. I'm not going to gatekeep anything. I'm not going to gatekeep the tech or the processes, because I think, like you said, having the hyper-local news is super, super important, because Burlington is not going to report on Virgins, and the Addy Indy is not necessarily going to report on Virgins either, but somebody's got to. Just know that there's a way forward. It just might not look as traditional as it used to. Obviously, what we're doing is not new, but it is in a way to have a solely online newspaper. We've been fortunate where we got to talk with another online only newspaper in California, and they gave us a bunch of helpful tips and said, hey, contact us if you need more help. We're happy to help, because they're in the same situation we are. They were literally in a news desert in California, and their local paper closed down, and it just took one person saying, we can't let this happen. And they found their own way through. I would just want people to know there's a way. It just Might take a little time, take a little digging, but there are definitely people out there willing to help, and willing. We had somebody email us probably within 24 hours of that article on Vermont Public going up saying, hey, if you need to know how to raise money, if you need to know how to do this, I'd love to help you. Just shoot me an email. And I was like, okay, great. We put you in a special file, like people who can help us. We're certainly willing to reach out to ask for help where we can. So I would hope others in our situation would be willing to reach out to get the help that they're looking for.
I think for me, it's been a really great example of how good things can happen when people come together with openness and good intentions. And it's given me hope in a way that, I don't know, I guess just realizing that all it takes is a few people coming together with commitment and some different skills to make things happen when nothing was there before. It's been really great for me to realize. And the feedback that we get probably from people, the feeling that we're helping people feel more connected.
I love that you brought up how willing people are to help and how many people stepped up for you when you were getting started. Like the publication in California, that person who mentioned that they have fundraising expertise and hey, they want you to come and talk to them when you're ready for that conversation. Also, community members wanting to write articles and things of that nature. I love your point that it just takes a few people. So often people think, I'm just one person. What can I really do? What kind of difference can I make? But what you and your team have built is such a great example of what can happen when a few people decide to take that first step and connect with others who feel similarly and then actually act on it. I think what has come out of that is something really incredible. You've kept your community connected. You've offered a news source for people in your community. And for people listening who might be thinking along those same lines, that if they lost their community paper or there really isn't much information out there in the community and they want to provide a source for their community, what first steps would you say they should take to maybe find others who have a similar thought or a shared vision so that they could start building something like a local news source in their own community?
I would start in your public forums. I wouldn't even hesitate if you're in a community where your newspaper has shuttered to reach out to the editor and say, well, I would like to continue this in some format, whether it's probably not your paper, something that's a community-based, newsletter or whatever, to start with them, because a lot of times they're going to have social media, they're going to have contacts of people. Our former editor, so the Brandon reporter, gave us a list of people who used to write articles, so we had that to work with too. And they can get notices out. So like in Vermont, we have Front Porch Forum, but I think New England states have Nextdoor. So those are places where you could put up a post and have a meeting at your local library and see who shows up. Because chances are you're not the only person who's missing your local news source. And you'd be really surprised at how many people just want to feel involved and feel helpful, I think, in some way. And for us, if people want to support what we're doing, whether they subscribe and just read our newsletter as we send it or just visit the website once in a while, following us on social media, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. And just the simplest thing you could do is just like a post, but liking it, sharing it, it's really fabulous too, because that just helps push our posts further out into the different algorithms and stuff. And again, if somebody starts up in your community, that's one of the best ways you can support them is tell people about it, share it on social media, just help get the word out in whatever way you can, because it takes the community to grow, honestly.
And I think it would have been a different matter had we not had that initial meeting set up by the Brandon Reporter folks as they were closing. But to me, it would be really daunting to get it together to say, okay, let's meet with a bunch of people. But I think there are enough people, at least in our town, there have been enough people who really care, who want there to be a publication where they can find out town news, that if you, as Carrie said earlier, cast the net wide and make it clear when you're inviting people in initially that you're not going to ask anything. They're not committing to do any certain thing, but they're just bringing their energy to the effort of figuring out what can come out of nothing, that it might be easier for people to step into as just an exploratory thing, then I think sometimes people are pretty hesitant to commit when they don't know what it's going to involve. I know I definitely hesitated, but just kind of making it an exploratory process as opposed to jumping in and having people commit to things, I think is really helpful. The thing that actually would be really important for people to know if they're considering doing this too is there really aren't a lot of costs if you're online only. It's a huge difference, both in cost and complexity. I think there are tech complexity things that we just have covered well. But just not having to worry about layout is huge. And so other than that, the initial software cost, just maybe $50 a month, something like that, I think, we really haven't had other costs. So it doesn't take that much.
Now, before I let you go, I want to make sure that our listeners know where to find you. You can check out the Neshobe Current at neshobecurrent.org. I have linked that in the show notes for everybody's convenience. So you can just go to the show notes, click there, and you will be taken over to the Neshobe Current website. And while you're there, you can sign up for their weekly email digest, stay up to date on what's happening in Brandon, Pittsford, and surrounding communities in Vermont. If you're local and you have story ideas, you can submit those right through the website. And there's also a contact button there so that if you're thinking about starting something similar in your own community, or if you have questions for Carrie, Nita, or the team, you can easily reach out. I want to thank you both so much for joining me today and sharing the story behind the Neshobe Current. What you're building is such a valuable resource to the community, and I'm really glad we had the chance to talk about it. And I wish you the continued success and growth that you deserve, and hope that our lovely listeners will become readers of the Neshobe Current. Thank you once again, Nita and Carrie, for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate your time.
No, thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in today, and thank you again to my guests, Carrie Bunker and Nita Hansen of the Neshobe Current, for coming in and talking about the way that their community stepped up to fill a void in local news coverage for their area. I hope you found the conversation insightful, and perhaps it's even given you some ideas on a model to explore if your area is in need of local news. I'll be back with a new episode of Notable New England on Sunday, May 24th, so I hope you will tune in. Until then, take care, everybody.